So great. Basically what we're going to do, if you've been on these calls before, this is actually the final one for the year. It's going to be a series of frequently asked questions that we're going to go through. And we will also do the trivia component. Oh, looks like I forgot to update the date from the last time we had a call. But anyway, we're just going to go through the questions that we have. And I'll give you all an opportunity to voice an answer to the question if you do know the answer, or if you want to take a shot at what the answer is. With some of these questions, though, there's not really necessarily like one right answer. There are a lot of right answers, so definitely feel free to take a shot at answering some of these. You can either type answers into the chat or go ahead and unmute. Ooh, and my friend Kathy just arrived. So we have one more person. Welcome, Kathy. It's a small group that we have. Oh, Sylvia's here. Oh, we're getting a few more people. That's great. Welcome, Kathy and Sylvia, our newcomers. Hi, good to see you. We want to make sure everybody has voted today or has already voted. And if you haven't already voted, leave this call now and go do that. But we're just going to get started with our remaining FAQs around researcher adoption of ORCID. And this is very informal, so feel free to like interrupt me, unmute yourself, get something to drink, make yourself comfortable. There is a trivia component. So let's just go ahead and jump into these questions. And then if more questions come up along the way, put that in the chat or speak up and say something, and we'll just address questions as we go. All right, so let's get started. So this is a continuation from the last call that we had. And so the question that we're picking up with is, can researchers sign into their ORCID ID record using their institutional login credentials? And we do have an answer from Sylvia, which is yes, and that is correct. So thank you, Sylvia. I'm going to add you. So this is what happens if somebody gets an answer right. They get added to the wheel of names. If I can exit outside of there we go. So Sylvia, I'm going to put you on the wheel of names, and then anybody else who answers questions on this call will get their names added. And at the end of the call, we'll spin the wheel and there will be one prize winner. So Sylvia, you are right. Researchers can sign into their ORCID record using their institutional login credentials as long as certain stipulations are met. There is some documentation that ORCID has on this for both end users and for organizations to make sure it's set up correctly on the back end. And so I'll share these links with y'all in the chat. So I mean, it's pretty straightforward for the end user. If I go to ORCID, oopsie, I thought I pasted that in my chat here. There we go. If I go to ORCID and I try to log in, you'll see that the sign in screen, it has changed recently. ORCID is updating the user interface. So if it's been a while since you've looked at this screen, you'll notice that it's a little bit different, but the option to sign in using your institutional credentials is still here. It's this button right here, access through your institution. You'll note that people can also sign in with their Google or their Facebook account too, just in case they want to do that. But basically, if they click on access through your institution, basically what they'll need to do is like just type in the name of the organization, and they can select it from the drop down. Then when they click continue, for most universities, this is already set up. So they'll be prompted to log in. The first time they do it, they will have to log in using their organizational credentials and then log into their ORCID record. But from then on, it will just log them into their ORCID record when they click on that option. So most universities are already set up to have this work. It works through something called EduGain, which is like a federated identity service. Most of the US universities are members of EduGain through something called the In Common Federation. And so this should already be working for your organization. If it's not working for your organization, there may be something that your identity management people, maybe in central IT, will have to do to make sure that works. So the documentation for that on the back end is available. And if you're not from a university, you might not be able to do this. So these are just some things to keep in mind. But if you want this to work for your organization and it's not working, take a look at the documentation. And if you still have problems, just contact me. I'm definitely not an expert at the single sign-on institutional federated identity stuff, but there are people at ORCID that I work with that are more experts around that. So we can get you the answers that you need. Any questions about signing into ORCID with the institutional credentials? Okay, great. So our next question, and this is one that I think it definitely has more than one right answer. So I will take more than one person with answers here, and I'm seeing some coming into the chat. The question is, what tactics have been successful in getting faculty to register for an ORCID ID? In the chat, I'm seeing Ellen with departmental mandates. That is absolutely correct. In many cases, whether the university at large has some sort of mandate, more commonly I've seen, for example, like all the faculty in the School of Medicine need to have an ORCID ID, that kind of thing. So departmental mandates are definitely a tactic that has been successful. Although in some cases it might backfire depending on the culture at your organization. I have talked to some people where there's a sentiment of mistrust with kind of administrative mandates. And so if faculty are told they have to do something, they might be likely to rebel instead. So this might work better or worse depending on the kind of culture and context of your organization, but mandates are definitely an option. I see Jaime offering to be a TI. I'm not sure what you mean by TI. It's probably something really straightforward that I am completely a trusted individual. There you go. Yeah, thank you, Jaime. Yep. Yeah, actually, that's a good point. So, you know, if you're working in the library or any other role working with faculty, and you're trying to convince faculty to get an ORCID ID, you can certainly offer to them to designate you as a trusted individual on their account so that they don't have to manage their own account, but you can do that on their behalf as a designated party. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that clarification. I think I got it. It came to my head right when you said that, so thank you. So that is correct as well. Ellen, I'm seeing again, funder and publisher mandates. So those are definitely factors that make the argument stronger for faculty to register for their ORCID ID if the funding organizations they're working with or if the publishers they're working with are requiring ORCID IDs. As people at probably, I think everyone here is from a university or some sort of organization. Unless you are from a funding organization, we don't have a ton of control over whether or not funders are mandating or publishers are mandating. But those are definitely good things to point out. Like, hey, you're in this department, you're publishing in these journals, you're trying to get this funding. Well, did you know that these people are requiring ORCID IDs? Definitely great argument there. So that's correct, like pointing out those funders and publishers mandates. Sylvia, encourage faculty by talking up the advantages. Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of pointing out the benefits for them as an individual to have an ORCID ID. It helps to distinguish them from other people, whether or not they have a common name or their name has changed. It can save them time depending on, how much information they have populated in their ORCID record and whether or not they're using other stuff that can transfer data to and from ORCID. So definitely helps to know the benefits of ORCID and be able to tell your faculty about that. And then Kathy, bring it up when a faculty member comes to you with a request to archive their data or article in the IR. That is definitely a good tactic. And as you say, it's very kind of one by one. So it would be kind of on these individual interactions, getting people one at a time when they come to you with some other request. If it makes sense to also mention ORCID at that time, I think that's a really great tactic too. So these are all really great answers. More from Kathy, collaborate with sponsored project staff to reach out to researchers. Absolutely. Sponsored projects, the research office, other stakeholders on campus. Sponsored projects, I think, are really invested because more and more funders are requiring ORCID IDs, and so they have a stake in making sure that everybody has their ORCID IDs. So all of these answers are right. I'm going to add everybody to the wheel. So let me just do that before I forget. So we've got Ellen, me, Kathy, Sylvia. So, okay, so actually now I gotta make sure I'm getting everybody the right amount of times. So Ellen had 2 answers. Sylvia answered also again. Ellen, Sylvia, and Kathy had 2 answers. So basically every answer you give, you're getting a chance to win on the wheel of names. Okay, so all really great answers. This is wonderful. So I had some thoughts in my slides I wanted to share as well. And I think, yeah, some of you already said these answers. So the main answers I would come to are to point out the publishers and funders in the faculty's discipline that use ORCID or ask for ORCID IDs. Another thing that can sometimes take a long time, but is our ultimate goal for helping faculty get ORCID IDs and see the benefits firsthand, is to use your ORCID membership to integrate the ORCID API with local systems that you're using. That way you can, have an immediate benefit. So you can tell faculty like, hey, our repository is integrated with ORCID, or our research information system is integrated with ORCID. So if you have information populated in your ORCID record, you can just transfer it over without having to sit there and type everything in. So having local systems that are integrated with the ORCID API can make it kind of this immediate tangible benefit when faculty go to use those integrations. It can help them really save time and reduce administrative burden. Because the data transfer with ORCID and other systems only works if those other systems are enabled to work with the ORCID API. So you might have faculty that are working with systems that aren't connected with the ORCID API, so they're not really going to be able to leverage that data transfer. So one of the things we're really trying to encourage and support is as many systems as possible to be integrated with ORCID. That way it really can benefit everyone in the saving time factor, in addition to just the distinguishing yourself, the disambiguation, which is my next point around just emphasizing the importance of having like a strong digital or online identity and presence. Which, a lot of people do on social media and whatnot, but when it comes to research and scholarly communication, it's probably better to have more than just like your Twitter account or your Facebook. So actually, as part of this, I wanted to point out something that I've been using in some presentations about ORCID lately, which is ORCID wrote about this in a blog, so I'll share this link with y'all. But there's an organization called the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and they did a report recently called Charting the Digital Transformation of Science, and it was based on survey data from 2018 of like 12,000 authors working in different disciplines across 60 countries. So it was like this big survey they did. And so what I want to share with you is some of the outcomes from that survey related to ORCID. Here's the link to this page that I'm on, so you can look at this in more detail. But essentially, the summary of this is the survey found that, in fact, ORCID is the most used identifier across the globe and across multiple disciplines for asserting an online identity. So it's really become kind of this central hub. So this chart right here is showing a variety of different disciplines across the bottom. And so each column represents, the researchers that were surveyed in those disciplines. And the blue box represents ORCID. So you can see that roughly 70% of researchers across all these disciplines are using ORCID, which is even higher than any individual author IDs from various platforms or identifiers maintained by research funding organizations. So that's one thing that the report found is like everybody, almost everybody is already using ORCID anyway. So they also found that, related to this and having some sort of persistent, trusted digital identity has a big impact on how researchers get evaluated. So whether that's just by random members of the public looking at research, but more likely by administrators and other researchers looking at research. The bottom line around this is if you have more than just the name, like if you can click on that ORCID ID and see where the person works, where they went to school, what other projects they've been involved with, that lends a lot more credibility to the person's work than just seeing their name and maybe their affiliation, but otherwise having no idea who this person is and where they're coming from. So ORCID is really emerging as the central, persistent, trusted space for this kind of digital identity. And the report also found that researchers with stronger digital identity tend to have more research engagement, so more using more like digital tools, more collaborations, maybe it leads to more like patents, getting more funding. So basically the summary of this slide is that the more information somebody can have on their ORCID record, and then of course, it's great to have other profiles and things too, and you can link all of those to ORCID, the side panel where you can link any other like websites or social media, you can link your Scopus ID. So using ORCID as kind of the central place for your online identity and then linking your other platforms or profiles to that can help with getting evaluated, getting better evaluation and leading to more research and engagement. So you can read the blog yourself, but these are just a few things I wanted to point out. And then along these same lines, a lot of people are, I just love this graphic because there are so many authors and most of them have ORCID IDs next to their name. And it was when they got the picture of the first black hole, and I was very excited about that a couple of years ago. But basically just some other benefits around ORCID even if you're using systems that don't integrate with the ORCID API, it just kind of makes people's contributions like more findable. It provides a central hub for listing everybody's information, sharing that information. So having your ORCID record with all of your information filled out can allow your stuff to be more easily shared and reused. And I would say the same thing applies to like using DOIs for various outputs too. When you have those identifiers, it's just easier to connect the dots between people, organizations, and outputs. And researchers can also more easily find each other, identify each other, find people to collaborate with, and get more recognition for their work. I could keep talking about this if anybody wants to hear more. Actually, I could keep talking about all this stuff for like hours. So there is a tool that I think some of you may be already familiar with around this recognition part. It's called Rescognito. I'll just share the link with you in the chat, and you can look at it kind of on your own, but it's based on ORCID IDs. So basically individuals who have an ORCID ID can kind of officially recognize anyone else that has an ORCID ID for various contributions to works or just in general. So I encourage you to take a look at that if you have spare time later. It's pretty cool. Any other thoughts on these tactics or like the benefits of ORCID for researchers and faculty in particular, or any other questions around this before we move to the next? And welcome, Barry. Good to see you. Okay, we'll go to the next one. All right, I think this is one that somebody had asked. I'm not sure if the person who asked this originally is on the call right now, but it's a good question for anybody that's working with grad students. So the question is, how can I pitch ORCID to grad students that aren't planning on being faculty members? Does anybody want to take a guess? Ellen, they might become researchers in industry. Absolutely, yes. Does anybody else have thoughts or ideas they want to share for this question? Author credibility, yeah. So if they're, planning on writing anything or producing any kind of outputs, helpful as your CV, yeah, that's definitely an option, Kathy. That's how I'm using my ORCID record these days. I don't even have a Word doc CV anymore. I'm just keeping all of my stuff in my ORCID record. And related to that, whenever I go to do like a presentation at a conference or something and they ask me for a bio, I'll give them just like one basic sentence, and then I'll say, to learn more about Sheila, go here. Then I just put a link to my ORCID record. So anybody who wants to know all of my stuff can just go look at my ORCID record, and I don't have to, retype all of that. I also put it in my email signature and just anywhere else where I can. Any other ideas? These are all great ideas. Because honestly, there is no one right answer, and I'm always looking for more ideas of how to present ORCID to people in a way that will resonate with them. Okay, so Ellen, Jaime, and Catherine are all getting added to the wheel. And those are all really great ideas and answers. Oh, John is here. I keep seeing people that I know coming into the call. Welcome, John. So basically, if anybody does ideas for pitching ORCID to grad students that aren't planning to be faculty members, feel free to pipe up or type it in the chat. I think, there are a lot of options depending on which discipline the grad students are in. But regardless of that, even most grad students are going to have to write some sort of thesis or dissertation. I know a lot of universities are requiring ORCID IDs, or at least asking for ORCID IDs when a grad student submits their thesis or dissertation. So So that's definitely something that they'll need while they're a grad student. But from there, it kind of depends on the discipline that they're in and the career that they're thinking of having. But always remember, though, that the C in ORCID stands for contributor. So it's open researcher and contributor ID. So even if you're not planning to go on to become a, researcher, technically, if you are going to be contributing to anything, you can have an ORCID ID. It makes total sense. It's free. That number can stay with you your entire career. A lot of the same benefits in terms of distinguishing yourself and having a kind of trustworthy, persistent online presence that you can link all of your other profiles to can be helpful. Oh, I'm seeing from Barry, link to NIH training grants. Yep. So if any grad students are planning on being involved in grants from NIH or any other funders that are asking for ORCID IDs, that will they'll need to have that. And then also, yeah, absolutely, NIH, AHRQ, and CDC are all requiring ORCID IDs. And then Barry, perpetual transferable CV for an academic career, absolutely. That's very similar to what Kathy had said. People can use their ORCID kind of as a CV. So answers. Barry, I will go ahead and add you to the wheel of names too. So anybody who gives a correct answer gets their name on the wheel, and we'll spin it at the end, find a winner. Okay, and let's see, another chat from Kathy. We have the ORCID field enabled in the ProQuest ETD submission form, and most students fill that out. Whether they flesh it out is another matter that we need to tackle. Yeah, that's great. So it's good that people are entering their ORCID ID into that ProQuest ETD submission form. But yeah, it's a whole nother story whether or not they have information populated in their ORCID record. And that's one of the big challenges that I think people are struggling with across the board is you get somebody to register for an ORCID ID, but then how do you make sure that they at least populate it with some, even just some basic information so that it can really be helpful to them. If anybody just has an ORCID ID but no information in their ORCID record, then it really, the value of it just isn't as strong. They just won't get as much value from distinguishing themselves with an ORCID ID record that has no information in it. And then of course they won't be able to save time when they're working with other systems that are ORCID enabled. So having ORCID as the central place for keeping track of your, education, employment, and works is just a really good practice to get into. As more systems become integrated with the ORCID API, people will start seeing a lot more benefits in being able to transfer data. Barry, schools and departments aspire to use the ORCID record with continuing connection to their grad institution to track the successes of their grads. That's very true. And we have, I think, a few examples in the community of this so far. I know that the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center actually did a mandate for all of their learners. So it's a medical center, so they have all different types of students, and they're requiring all of them to get ORCID IDs and connect them with the institution so that they can not only track successes, but I know they get a lot of grant funding for programs for students, and then they have to do the grant reporting years later after many of the students have left the organization. So ORCID really is a good way to keep up with your researchers after they leave, if that's something that you if that's something that's of interest. Yeah, the tough part is populating and maintaining the ORCID record and keeping the connection to the grad school institution, as others have said. Yeah, totally. That's the thing. Especially, I know that UT Southwestern was running into this where they got everybody to get ORCID IDs and connect them, but if they're planning on using that ORCID data for future grant reporting, there needs to be information in there. And for a lot of the students, there's little or no information in there. So that's one of the big challenges. And that's actually one of the big reasons this like barrier around getting enough information into people's ORCID records is one of the reasons why ORCID is going to be putting out a tool that we will all soon be able to use that will allow administrators to write information to people's ORCID records, just like by uploading a CSV file to this platform that ORCID is working on. Because I know there are just a lot of organizations that, you know, either aren't using systems that are integrated with ORCID or don't have the resources to do custom integration. So we're kind of going to have a tool to help fill some of those gaps while we wait for more systems to get integrated. So yeah, all good points, all good answers. Barry, I'm going to add you to the wheel again for your second answer there. Stand by. Okay. Great discussion. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so for our next question. Oh, wait, let's see, I had some answers. I just want to make sure I am getting those. Oh yeah, so some of my answers that I was going to have for y'all is, again, just highlighting the importance of that digital online presence that we talked about a little bit earlier. In my perfect world, LinkedIn, ResearchGate, and Google Scholar would all be integrated with ORCID, and people would be able to like link their ORCID ID to their LinkedIn profile and import data and export data. That hasn't happened yet. Hopefully it happens soon. I know there are like conversations that start and stop with these different platforms. I've actually thought about doing like some sort of petition where we all sign it and send them. I don't know if that would work. I'm still kind of thinking through that idea, but these kinds of platforms that a lot of people use, if you do get a chance to like, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you have to like contact LinkedIn support or, you know, that kind of thing, just try to pressure them to integrate with ORCID, because really they're the ones that have to integrate with ORCID. My other answer, yeah, if they do plan to do any publishing, apply for any grants, or just have a kind of digital identity in the broader ecosystem, even if they're not planning on becoming faculty, it can still be beneficial to them. So those are just some of the other answers that I wanted to point out. Yes, Jaime, integrating with Hein Online was very important for the law school. One faculty member anyway. Yeah, absolutely. And that was something that, you know, Hein Online, they saw the value of ORCID in what they were doing, and they decided to go ahead and integrate. So we really are relying on vendors and third-party platforms to integrate with ORCID. ORCID can't force other platforms to integrate. So we're always trying to, you know, find the systems that people are using the most and try to get those integrated with ORCID so that it can really benefit everyone. All right, I think we have another question. Yes, and for this one, again, there's no one right answer. I'm definitely open to hearing ideas from the group. This question is, does anyone have a strategy for reviving ORCID adoption after an earlier push? And this question was actually, I know, from somebody who was on, I think, the last call, because they had, like in 2017, they did a big ORCID outreach push, and then all the staff that were involved with that left the organization, and so now they're ready to like do another revival of ORCID outreach. So they were just kind of looking for ideas. So if anybody has ideas, definitely share those, and you could get your name on the list of the Wheel of Names. Sylvia, I'm seeing your comment in the chat. Any update about integrating with SSRN? I have not heard any updates there. We do have an email template for contacting SSRN and asking them to integrate with ORCID. I think several people have sent that, but I haven't heard any update. If you have the opportunity, feel free to contact SSRN and ask, and I can also pull up the link for that email template and get that to you. Let me make myself a note to do that. Okay, and then I'm seeing some answers in the chat. So Ellen had the second push originate from another university unit. So for example, if the first push came from the research office, then maybe have the second push be led by sponsored projects. I think that's a great idea. Because for example, if you've already heard from one department 3 years ago about ORCID and now you're hearing again, you might just be like, I already know about this. But if you're hearing about it from a different source, you might perk up a little bit. Also because, for example, sponsored programs has a little bit of a different angle in terms of get your ORCID ID set up so you can be ready to apply for grants and whatnot. So great answer. Thanks, Ellen. And then Kathy, look for new personnel in the research office as opportunities arise to engage, or any other senior admin. Yeah, that's another great point, kind of building off of Ellen's in terms of, if previous staff who were advocating for ORCID have left the organization, try to find other maybe new people who can get involved, get on board. It really does help to have senior level administrators on board in many cases. And having that messaging kind of come from the upper levels of the organization can make people really pay attention. But also grassroots growth and just spreading word of mouth can also be really helpful. So Ellen and Kathy, these are great ideas that I'm going to add you to the names again. Kathy and Ellen. Let's see, we got another chat come through. Barry, yay. Okay, so in COVID time, we are mostly online. However, I'm not sure why. We found a combination of an email template distributed to departments, grad school, postdoc office, research center leaders, etc., for distribution to their constituents has been surprisingly successful. Oh, that's so good. We had several hundred more faculty and other researchers connect their ORCID to our institution. We're not sure why response has been better now than before. Perhaps people have more time or opportunity in the mostly online environment, and then using Twitter to reinforce that message. That is such great news. I'm so happy to hear about that. And yeah, it's like, who knows? I mean, in this day and age, I just don't even know what to say anymore. I can't predict certain things, but yeah, you may try like a different time of year. I think, in this time of COVID where everybody's doing everything online, I don't really know what's going on, but it sounds like this worked for you, Barry, at UNC Chapel Hill, which is great. I know that for some things, people will pay more attention now while everyone's like working from home. But for other things, like for me, I feel like I've signed up or like registered for so many free online events, for example, that I'm like kind of getting a little overloaded and just start ignoring those emails. So it may be that you just hit a sweet spot in people's attention spans in terms of the timing and just everything that's going on. But that's a really good story. Thanks for sharing that, Barry. Just as an idea, like, well, maybe if you reached out before and it didn't really work, maybe just wait a little bit and try again. Perhaps the environment of ORCID requirements and expectations by journals and publishers have primed people to follow through, and they're less distrustful of setting the institution as a trusted party. That may be too. As time goes on, I think people are coming across ORCID more and more. So there's more kind of trust building. People have seen this requirement for ORCID if they're publishing. So they're like, oh yeah, ORCID, I know what that is. I can connect my ORCID ID to the organization. So yeah, that, and at least that's the hope, is that as time goes on, more and more people will become familiar with ORCID and feel more comfortable connecting their ORCID ID with various organizations. So great point. Barry, I'm going to put you on the list again, because that's just a good contribution to ideas that everyone can use. Wonderful. Awesome, thanks. Okay, so yeah, I didn't have any real nuggets set aside for this question. I was mostly interested in hearing y'all's ideas, which y'all have a lot of good ones, so thank you. And if I hear of any other good ideas from others outside of this call, I will be sure to let you all know. All right, how are we doing on time? 15 minutes. Okay, I think we're going to make it through. All right, I think this is actually the last question. It is. This is the last question, and it's basically the same as the very first question that we answered on the first part of this call. Not today, but when we did it a couple weeks ago. So what are the best practices for supporting researchers and encouraging faculty and students to use ORCID? And we've actually already talked about a lot of them. There's more than one right answer here. And when I say best practices, there's not like a authoritative entity setting these best practices. We as a community are setting these best practices simply by trial and error and sharing what has worked and what maybe hasn't worked as well. So just best practices for basically just supporting researchers using ORCID. I see that Ellen says quick responses to questions from the campus community. Yes, and that's a really great point. It really does help to have someone local at your organization that is kind of like a designated person for at least triaging questions about ORCID. Maybe you don't know all of the answers. Maybe that person doesn't know all of the answers right away, but at least you can highlight who to go to locally on campus if somebody does have questions about ORCID. And then if that person needs more questions answered, I am here to support you. The ORCID team is also here to help with escalating questions. So the faster we can get answers to researchers, the better, the more supported they will be. So that's absolutely a great point. Kathy, give them info on how to integrate with other resources such as the bio sketches and Science CD. Yeah, that's so true. You know, identifying other systems that integrate with ORCID and helping researchers with like tutorials and things of how they can actually utilize those integrations is a really good way to provide that support. Sylvia, integration with other institutional systems. Absolutely, the more your local institutional systems can be integrated with ORCID, the more that will encourage and support researchers to use those integrations, and they will see more immediate and tangible benefits from doing that. So that's definitely a great answer. Jaime, only discuss what one may be willing to do on behalf of faculty and discuss integrations that are important to faculty. Yeah, these are good points. I think the first part of your point is kind of harkening back to the idea of being a trusted individual for faculty, which is definitely another way to support that usage is offering to be a trusted individual, and definitely looking at, what systems are those faculty using, and really pointing out the ORCID integrations in those systems for sure. Kathy following up, linking to short ORCID video content is helpful for giving people info on how to integrate with other resources they're using. So absolutely. And then Kathy also keeping updated ORCID LibGuide and pushing those boxes out for subject specialists to integrate into their content. Yeah, this brings up a few good points. Definitely having some sort of LibGuide or just web page at your organization that has information about ORCID. And if you are somewhere that has subject specialists, librarians, or maybe like discipline specific experts that are working with researchers, definitely connect with them, and just make sure that there's some open communication there. And then I also have a note from Bonnie. Upper management support and modeling is what works for us at Research Triangle Institute. So that's a great, again, having that support from the higher levels of administration and management, and having those messages come from authoritative figures can really help encourage researchers to use ORCID. So these are all really great answers. Let me make sure I get everyone's names onto the wheel again. So get out of here. Okay, I had Ellen, I had Kathy, I had Jaime, I had Bonnie, and I had Barry, I think, or there was Sylvia. Got you. Okay, Sylvia. I'm like, who answered this? All right. Did I get everybody? Yeah, I think so. Ellen, also messages from faculty advocates to other faculty members. So true. So it can be really helpful to have those upper level administrators sending messages, but also in other circumstances or in a combined circumstance, having that word of mouth spread between faculty can be really, really helpful, sometimes even more so than the encouragement from upper level admin. So it's really great to try to find people who we call ORCID champions. So an actual researcher that is using ORCID, they have seen the benefits, and they really, have good messages to share. I think they call them like testimonials. So yeah, having those faculty advocates can be really helpful as well. So that's a separate answer. So I'll put you again on this list. Okay. All right, so this is actually perfect timing because that was our last question, but related to this, I did just want to make sure that everybody knows, and you probably all do know this, but just in case you don't, I'm telling you again, we do have a planning guide for doing outreach that has a lot of ideas and examples from across our community. So as far as I'm concerned, this guide kind of serves as a documentation of some of the best practices that we have discovered in our community. So if you haven't taken a look at this, I would encourage you to do that because it does have a lot of really good ideas and examples. And then if you have other things that you've done that have worked well and you're not seeing them on this outreach planning guide, let me know because I can add it, because we're always looking for new ways to do things that are even more helpful. So, okay, now I think, are there any just last minute questions before we spin the wheel of names? All right, well, I think it's the moment we've all been waiting for, and I hope this brings some joy to your election day. This has been amazing. Even though we only have 8 people on this call, there are 21 entries into the Wheel of Names, so somebody's going to be a lucky winner. So thank you all for your input and participation. And I am going to spin the wheel. Ready? Here we go. It looks like Sylvia was our winner today. Awesome. Congrats, Sylvia. Yes. Thank you for participating. So Sylvia, I will send you an email separately so that I can get you your prize. So just stand by for that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you everyone for participating. I do hope that this was helpful. I hope that you maybe learned something that you didn't already know. This was great from my perspective. I really appreciate y'all sharing your insight and your ideas. So afterwards, I will send the link to the notes and the slides and the recording so you can all have that on hand. Aside from that, if any other questions do come up, just let me know. Just don't hesitate to contact me. My email is there. And with that, I think we are good to go now, but I hope everybody just has a great